this year, reading the books, talking about ideas, and crafting the essay. We've asked Mrs. Mercado to be the third member of our panel. I'm Mr. Neidiger. I will chair the panel this afternoon. And we'll ask the questions for the first 45 minutes or so, and then we'll turn it over to you all. We love questions from the audience, especially questions from former students, family. Often the best questions come right at the end when we turn to the audience. We'll start with you to tell us about your books and your ideas.
Okay, first off, I would like to thank Mr. Seifert for helping me along this process, and Mr. Neidiger for being the chairman of my panel, and also Ms. Mercado for joining us today, and also my lovely audience for coming here. For today, I chose to read Persuasion by Jane Austen, Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert, and Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. When I first chose these books, I had no idea what I wanted to write about, and I didn't have any idea for the first couple months of the whole journey. But after reading the books and starting the writing process, I realized that what I wanted to write about was what makes a good relationship in general as a whole. And the way that I came to this conclusion is that between Persuasion and Madame Bovary, we see a multitude of relationships and how those relationships affect those in them. We also know from Aristotle that a friendship of the good is one that leads both parties or both people within it to a virtuous lifestyle. And yeah. So a good relationship is one that leads a virtuous life for both people in it.
Thank you. And that's your thesis statement?
Yeah.
Would you say it one more time?
The relationship, or a good relationship, gives a virtuous lifestyle to the people in it.
Good relationship leads to a virtuous lifestyle to the people. And why don't you just give us a few examples of what would not be what you're looking for here? So a relationship that doesn't lead to that virtuous lifestyle.
So I would say relationships that, just a few, relationships that don't lead to a good lifestyle or virtuous lifestyle would have to be one where there's more being taken from one side of the party, so selfish reasons within it. You're leading the other person into a bad lifestyle, and one that exceeds out of your expectations. One where your expectations of it exceeds out of what you're capable of attaining.
Okay, good. So the first thing you mentioned is selfishness or imbalance in the relationship. That's not going to cause them to be virtuous, so we have a problem. I want to ask some questions about the very opening of your paper. Sometimes that's just a throwaway line, but you say, when starting a relationship of any kind, you must think about whether you want the relationship for selfish desires, whether you're going into it with the best intentions for the other. Is that how relationships work? Before you start it, you pause. You say, all right, let me evaluate this. Is this a good intention? Is this a bad intention?
Yeah, that is one of the flaws of my paper, I will admit. But I think that it's not at the very start of it, now that I see that. It has to deal with in the beginning stages of the relationship that you have with the person, because by then you get a sense of who they are, and you should know who you are and what you want from that, and what you want from the relationship. And you can tell from knowing all of those if that relationship will succeed and if it's attainable.
But you're saying that that's not necessarily at the beginning of a relationship.
Yes, I realized that after rereading my paper.
How do most relationships work?
Most relationships work by you meeting the person, then you start talking any form, and then I guess there's like a sense of click in between the two people, and then you just spend your time from there, and then you go about that. But I think that's what flaws like what hinders people from attaining good relationships. It's because that obviously you can't go into wanting to be friends with somebody with like a whole all mapped out, but it's definitely something that you have to think about, and whether if you can reasonably attain a virtuous lifestyle alongside that person.
Just want to let you know, there are a few people joining us on Zoom, so since you have no other way of knowing that, I thought I'd tell you. Okay, so you meet someone, you start talking, you see if there's a click. You click with the other person. That's an interesting way of putting it. And does that tell you anything about virtue, or if you're sharing the same goals?
No, because something that I talked about is that even if there's a click in that, that doesn't mean that you both are virtuous and are seeking out a good relationship, because two people with bad motives can click and but they can't fulfill a good relationship.
Yeah, did Emma and Charles click?
They did not.
No?
Well,
What brought them together?
in a sense. So what brought them together was their desperation for love, because Charles was recently a widow, and Emma was previously, well, she was let me go back. Up until she met Charles, she was living in a convent with her father, and she didn't have any real expectations of what love would be like in anything, in the aspects of what living life would be like. So she based off all what she wanted from these romantic novels that she had been reading, and that became her truth. And so both of them did not think about truly whether if they wanted the relationship and the marriage with that person, but they just thought about having a relationship and all the emotions and how much good it would bring them, supposedly. And that's what clicked them together.
Oh, so there was a click,
Yeah.
but it was a bad click.
Yeah.
So what's a good click?
A good. So I think you can't really say, well, I think you have to know who you are and who the other person is to know if it's a good click. I don't think you can immediately say what is a good click or a bad click, because they didn't know that click was a bad one. They thought it was great for them, but then they found out that they are not the right people for each other.
Self-knowledge is something you're emphasizing again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we go down that direction? How do you get to know yourself?
Well, something that I'm not entirely sure on getting to know yourself, but in relation to attaining a good relationship, you have to know if that expectation of, so in Emma's example, she had to have known if her expectation with her marriage with Charles, let me go back, sorry. What flawed her like with Charles and her wanting of the marriage with Charles is because she didn't think about who like she is, who like her city around her and the world around her, because that's something that you have to take into consideration, is if what you're wanting abides by those.
So it's not just self-knowledge, it's also city knowledge?
Yeah.
To know your city, what do you mean by that?
So you have to know, so again, back to Emma. So she first did not know herself in that what she was wanting was not a marriage with Charles, but she just wanted the grand emotions that she would expect to have from a marriage, and she wanted to live this extravagant life. And so she first didn't pass that, but then she didn't know who Charles was, and how her relationship with him would be. And so that led to there being so she already had two gaps of what she could not fulfill, because she couldn't fulfill what she actually wanted, which was this grand love life in life, full of extravagant emotions that she could feel. And then she married Charles, who is very bland, and just very bland. I think you could say is the best way to describe him.
So bland he can't be described otherwise?
Yeah.
Take something bland and make it blander.
Yeah. So she already filled that, and it wasn't in her not aspects, but in her capabilities to live a luxurious life either, because Charles wasn't a very successful doctor. And then later on, that's where she has the gaps between the first two, but then later on she goes through many affairs against Charles with Leon and Rodolphe, which just doesn't conform to society norms, and having affairs, going against your spouse.
So I was asking about this sort of city knowledge. Did she not understand that the society looked down on that sort of thing, or?
No, she did. It's just her desires for this extravagant marriage overrided that.
Okay, so it's all these other things that she has, but she doesn't really recognize it about herself? Is
Yes.
that the stuff? She doesn't realize the sort of marriage she wants, or she doesn't realize something about Charles?
I think it has to, I think it's a mixture of both, because the marriage itself is completely flawed, because neither of them knew anything about the other. They just saw each other, well, at least Charles saw her, and he thought, oh, I want to pursue her. And then he asked her father, and she didn't know any better, and she had this grand imagination of what love and marriage would be like, and so she said yes, and that's what led to the fall of it. And Charles didn't know anything about her either. He just was sad because of his previously dead wife, and so he wanted to jump back into love again.
Yeah. So clearly there's a problem in the relationship. We're just trying to pinpoint what it is, because you're telling us there are good relationships that lead to virtue, and there's bad relationships that don't. But again, you talk about she doesn't understand, she doesn't have the knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't seem to be a self-knowledge that you were talking about. It's a knowledge of what marriage will be like, or some other thing external to herself.
Yeah. So maybe then it's the societal thing. So I would say what led to her fall of wanting the root marriage is that she didn't know what marriage is actually like. She had no idea, because she ingrained it to herself that the marriage in these romantic novels is what marriage will be like. But then for Charles, it's just himself, because I don't think he really knew well, maybe he did know who he was, but he didn't know how he would affect Emma. And so that's where it led him to his fall with wanting the marriage.
It would be good if this sort of knowledge were available somewhere other than in romantic novels. Because what do romantic novels suggest that marriage to Charles doesn't provide?
Just like these grand acts of love that Charles does not have in himself, and because he also doesn't know how to deal with Emma. He doesn't have enough emotional capacity for how much she gives off.
Why not?
He's bland, and he jumps into the marriage way too fast.
Is it as simple as that? That he looks bland. He is personally bland. He's a bland doctor, and she is beautiful, sort of outrageously, unrealistic, incredibly beautiful. She doesn't belong where she's born, and yet she's born there. So it seems like there's something, I don't know, there's people generally marry people who are sort of their equals, at least today. Is there something in nature? Is there something nature, they should have looked at each other and been like, super attractive, nothing. Maybe mix.
Unless it's a sitcom.
Right.
Yeah.
I think so, because it seems so evident that they do not go well, just in how they interact, because they went to this grand party with extravagant things, and Charles did not fit in at all. But Emma was having the time of her life, and she fit in perfectly. And then he also does not know how to read Emma at all, because I don't remember the name of the patient, but Charles went to fix up his patient's leg, but he messed up, and he had to go back and cut off the leg, which only made Emma grow, like, I don't know what the word is, grow more in disgust with him. But he failed to realize that. He couldn't even see the disgust that she was presenting to him from that action.
Yeah, she encouraged him to do that, to do this crazy operation.
Mm-hmm.
Why did she encourage him to do it? So you have this man with a club foot who, he's fine. He just has a club foot.
Mm-hmm.
But then they had this new procedure, and so he's the one, he reads up on the procedure and does it. Why does she want him to do that?
That was one of the things that I don't exactly remember, but did it have to do with money, or how his image?
She seemed, the money seemed, it might help if there were money involved. That might be one way for doctors to make more money, to do new procedures.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe fame too, I don't know. So anyway, she wanted him to do it, and then he failed at it. And so what happens then?
She grows in more disgust with him and feels her hatred for him.
And he doesn't understand.
Yeah.
So here's an opportunity for him to at least be like slightly interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
And while Emma is heavily sick because she can't fulfill these desires that she wants with Charles, so she becomes depressed and physically ill, which Charles can't even see at all. He thinks, oh, let's move, or oh, let's go see an opera or something like that. He just avoids the problems that he can't, well, he avoids the problems, or it's that he can't see problems at all.
Which would be worse?
That he can't see them, I would say.
Worse than actively avoiding them?
Yeah.
She has other relationships with men, as you pointed out earlier. Why don't, is it the case, you seem to say that they don't succeed because they're outside the bounds of convention? Or society doesn't accept them? Is that true? Like, why don't those succeed?
That's one of the reasons why it overall would not succeed, but with, one of them, she did the same thing that Charles does to her. He got bored of her and just started thinking of her as a nuisance because of how much she tried to chase after and deflect these desires onto him.
Yeah, I feel bad that you had to read that book. It's really depressing. Are there any models in it of?
I would not. I would say no.
Yeah, that's terrible. What does that mean? That there's nothing in this book to sort of say, this is nice.
I'm not really sure what that means.
Yeah, because it comes back to what we were exploring. How do you get this knowledge?
Yeah.
Are books the only place you get knowledge about relationships?
Mm-hmm.
At least romantic novels provide some sort of satisfaction, at least to their characters.
Well, maybe it's to show that not all marriages can work out perfectly, and that maybe it's just a guide to don't do this.
Don't get married?
No, don't rush into marriage.
What? It's just a guide. You said, what's the it?
It's a book.
Oh, the book that you read.
Yeah.
Not the book
Not
of the
in-
world. Yeah, I'm trying to live within the world of the book and
No.
you see what?
There is no guy.
Because they have examples to look to, but they're all negative examples.
Yes.
You're saying. So, that's tough.
Yeah, and even Charles' previous marriage wasn't some
Yeah.
massive success. So on the one hand, I would wanna ask, like, what do you do in that sort of circumstance? So Flaubert writes this book, and it's not something you address in the paper, but what happens when society reaches that point, that it cannot provide people who meet each other's demands? It cannot educate them, it can't even show you, to a beautiful woman, it shows only, provincial farm people, a provincial dumb doctor, that's like the best she can hope for. There's something wrong with that.
I think it might be just the negative perspective of what life is like, because, we have Persuasion, which is just like any Jane Austen movie, I'm sorry. No, I did not read, okay. I'm just gonna stop talking for a second. Okay. But then we see, it's just the negative version, because in Persuasion we see the joys of marriage and the joys in having to wait for this marriage between Jane and Mr. Wentworth, because it.
And.
And, yeah. Because what they went through is, they were previously engaged, but what stopped them was social class, because Jane's father, not Jane, I'm so sorry, I keep on looking at the book and saying Jane. I need to put that. Anne's father was heavily affected in prioritized class in how people perceived them, and not wanting to have Anne marry somebody with a lower social class, which was the case with her and Mr. Wentworth, and so that's what broke them off. But then in the end, we see them both joining together and being able to create a good relationship.
They at least seem, why are they able to get back together? So they failed originally through neither party's fault, but because Anne took advice regarding, that's one of the ways in which we're educated. There's a difference between class. It's not just bad, you shouldn't marry this man because he's in an unreliable situation. That seems like good advice. But it's bad advice that you shouldn't marry him because he's not an aristocrat like me. Maybe that's bad. But how do they get back together? If friendship is the thing that's supposed to make people virtuous, it seems in this text that they get virtuous on their own, and then they come back and they see each other. So how does that happen?
It happened, so it was on their own, but it was inflicted by each other. And that's what I think is key for them, at least, because they had spent so much time without each other, and Wentworth even had a disdain for her and did not want to interact with Anne for a good while before, when they first saw each other again. And so the way that they rekindled their relationship together was through interacting with each other within the friends and family that they had shared and that they were spending time together with at the same time. And so they both realized that they couldn't find anybody else that would satisfy them or bring them as much happiness as the other did, which they both tried to find in other people. But from their time separated and then meeting him again, Anne was able to at least get, I still don't know what exactly it is, but she gets the courage to go against her family and not fall under their will of, oh, you can't marry him, or because he was of lower social class, or anything like that. And then Mr. Wentworth had a sense of pride that he had been wounded after Anne rejected the marriage. And so he was dealing with that when he first met Anne again, but once he started talking to her again, he was able to realize, no, she is the only person I can interact with that will fulfill me intellectually and everything else. And so he realized that she was the only person for him, and that he had to make, and then, so he had to get over that pride of his.
So you would advise, I mean, this is an excessive period of waiting, right? To years. But the proof is really the fact that they're not with anyone else when they see each other. So that's, I mean, that provides the ground for a certain kind of hope. So is waiting a good idea? Would you advise that sort of thing for maybe Emma and Charles? Would that fix them?
I don't know if waiting for Emma and Charles would have fixed anything. I think communication between the two of them is what they needed the most, which is something that they lacked heavily. So I don't think waiting would work for Emma and Charles, but I think you definitely don't have to go through their length of waiting, but I think there should be a waiting process where you, before, I mean, at least with marriage, where you have to think about should I marry this person, are they actually for me, and how are we together, and things like that.
I mean, the other problem with waiting is that, I mean, maybe these people just don't see each other again.
Mm-hmm.
It's random that he comes back, not really, but it seems random. This is like that argument between Lizzie and Charlotte Lucas in Pride and Prejudice about, you know, if a man likes you, you gotta go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Cause you may not have another opportunities are scarce. Man, if Emma waits around, if she doesn't pounce on Charles, maybe nobody else is gonna show up. So it seems there's a kind of necessity involved in that this is just pure luck, pure dumb luck.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry, I'm not even asking a question. Is Anne right to wait? Is she right to remain faithful to Wentworth, who she really loved and still loves, in the same, for that amount of time, without knowing he's gonna come back? Is she right to wait?
I think in her case, it was completely right, because again, they both realized that each other was the only person who they could feel the most happiness and fulfillment with. And so if she didn't wait, then she would never have been able to realize that and get that fulfillment.
Does she wait with the expectation that
No,
he'll come
no,
back?
no, but.
And neither does he, right?
No.
So the waiting is more a sign that nothing else is going to fill that role than it was some choice.
Yeah.
Mrs. Mercado, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was intrigued by a sentence that you wrote describing Emma and her husband and her interest in Rodolphe. And you said her disgust with Charles only fuels her motives to become more infatuated with Rodolphe. And so I'm wondering if you meant it the way that I'm reading it, the way I'm reading that sentence is, you're basically saying that she's choosing to become infatuated with him. And I'm wondering if you see that as a choice. You know, people sometimes talk about their infatuations like, oh, what could I do, right? I was in love. What could I do? Like, it's something that happens to us rather than being something that we choose.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see their relationship?
I think there was a choice, because Emma she tried to fulfill what she wanted with Charles, but she wasn't able to. She figured that out after giving birth to his child, and because what she really wanted was those grand emotions that you get from a marriage, or what people think that you should get from it. And so she